Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. After a surprisingly entertaining sprint race, Max Verstappen wins, but yet more drama at Red Bull with a battle between Verstappen and Perez in the first couple of corners getting pretty heated at the time, and even some big words mentioned after the race itself. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Some sad news to share, unfortunately, earlier this morning. In the Formula Regional European Championship Series by Alpine, I watched a fair bit of this championship last year actually, and it was at Spa today, and unfortunately a horrific incident in which Dilano Hoff lost his life, and you know, there was a minute's silence held, I think certainly before the F2 race today. So really sad to see. Lots of outpouring, as there always is, from the motorsport community, and it must be said the conditions in Spa were not dissimilar in many ways to what we saw in 2021 when the race was, well, it wasn't a race, right? They just drove behind the safety car the entire time and the fans didn't like it. But similar conditions in the race here, and it was one of the instances that you've seen a million times at Spa now, to be honest, where you go up Radion and at the top of Radion somebody spins, nobody coming behind can see because of all the spray. Cars everywhere, people are piling into other cars, you know, T-boning cars. I believe that's what caused the fatal accident. So it's just one of those things at Spa, really. I mean, it wasn't long ago that Monza had a reputation as being a circuit that, you know, fatal accidents happened all the time, but there hasn't been a fatal accident in Monza, I believe, at least since this millennium, I'm pretty sure. So, you know, but it seems to happen at Spa all the time. You know, people are talking about changes to the track and all this. Maybe it's just, look, don't race when it's incredibly wet, and maybe these incidents won't happen. Let's talk about the sprint day then. So sprint qualifying went on this morning, or the shootout or whatever. There was lots of action here, actually. Piastri got blocked by Leclerc. Leclerc admitted afterwards in the steward's room that, look, his team didn't give him any information on this, and you've got to say that, again, Javi, his engineer, doesn't cover himself in glory, for instance, like this. Leclerc himself says that maybe he could have let Piastri past earlier. Piastri was definitely impeded into this corner, but Lewis Hamilton was the surprise, really, out in SQ1 after doing some good laps. He got one lap time deleted that would have ended up being good enough for P6, and then he couldn't do his final lap because of the incident we are about to mention right here. So there was lots of talk about this one, but as far as I'm concerned, quite surprisingly, there was no talk about it from the stewards. So Hamilton was trying to do his final lap attempt at this point, and when there's 20 cars on track, there's so much traffic about, Hamilton let one car go, and then he goes for his lap, just as Verstappen's coming up behind him. Verstappen definitely had to slow down a little bit here through these final couple of corners, because he was definitely being impeded in part by Hamilton, had a load of yellow mini sectors here. So Verstappen wasn't happy about this, comes up to the line, and because Verstappen, so Hamilton opens up his DRS flap, you guys can see it very clearly here. He's clearly trying to start a fast lap at this point. Verstappen's been impeded marginally by Hamilton, and has way more momentum coming into that final corner because he's just been on a hot lap and has the slipstream. So he then pulls alongside Hamilton here, coming up in the run to turn 1, and completely blocks Hamilton. Like, if this isn't impeding, I actually don't know what is. Now, you might argue here from Verstappen's perspective that, well, Hamilton blocked him, so it's deserved that Verstappen gets him back, and maybe that's the reason why the stewards didn't look at it right. But fundamentally, if this isn't impeding, I actually don't know what is, to be honest, because, I mean, here's, you know, obviously Piastri impeding Leclerc, or Leclerc impeding Piastri, sorry, and here's, you know, literally Verstappen just parked his car on the apex so Hamilton couldn't turn in. It seemed like a retaliation is effectively what it seemed like, right? Verstappen was like, oh, you ruined my lap, and probably did cost him a couple of tenths, so Verstappen gets Hamilton back by ruining his lap, and there's no more time at this point for Hamilton to complete his lap and get round enough time, and he'd already have lost at this point. Even if Hamilton tried to continue, he'd have lost a good 6-7 tenths just on this incident and would lose all the momentum down into turn 3. So Hamilton had to just abort the lap and had no time to go again. So Hamilton was out, and this didn't even get noted or really talked about much at the time, which is a little bit confusing because even if Hamilton did block, you know, Verstappen and maybe would get a 3-place penalty, that would have started in P20 anyway. It was already P18, so it wouldn't have mattered that much. But surely if the stewards want to be consistent, then this, maybe both incidents deserve 3 places, especially when Leclerc gets penalised for this. And yet this one, the whole Verstappen-Hamilton incidents, both ways, were just not even talked about by the steward. It just doesn't really make much sense to me, to be honest. So yeah, Hamilton couldn't do his lap, got definitely impeded by Verstappen, but I guess the stewards didn't really care for whatever reason. But Leclerc got done for 3 grid spots as well. So yeah, the consistency of these stewards isn't always there. Hulkenberg to me was the standout though. He put his hat into P4 at the end of qualifying. Verstappen just dominated the entire session. Perez was P2, Norris P3, Leclerc and Sainz ended up 5th and 6th. Russell had a hydraulic failure as well, which meant that he couldn't get any further than P15. So both Mercedes, bit of a disastrous day from them, but actually they had very good pace relatively in the sprint, and we'll get to that in a second. And thankfully it was raining, so this is what we really wanted, right? These are the best races when it's wet and then it dries up at some point and you know that it's going to be slicks, but you're not exactly sure when. Those are just, it makes for fantastic races. So it was quite clear that inters were going to be needed at the start. Pretty funny that Bottas chucked on the mediums. They did one lap and they were like, yeah, this isn't going to work. Like, Valtteri, we've got to bring you in. So he effectively started from the last position because he was coming out of the pit lane, and Hamilton made a monster start into turn one. He did a stroll. You guys remember Stroll at Suzuka last year when he went up the inside and just overtook like 5 cars? That's what Hamilton does here. It was right up on Russell already after the first few cars he overtook. But Perez gets Verstappen into turn one, and it was a nice battle between the two Red Bulls into turn one, but Perez ran a bit wide all over the curb, and Verstappen had a better line. So this battle was not over at this point at all, and it continued on the run down to turn two. So turn two isn't really a turn, it's just the kink on the straights there running up to turn three when you go up the hill. And Perez said in the post-race interview that he didn't know where Verstappen was, he couldn't see him. I can't imagine that's true because he knows that he had a bad exit. Verstappen, he knew surely was going to be coming back at him from somewhere, and he squeezed Verstappen here onto the grass. And it's quite clear to see from a shot like this. This is pretty much the best image I could get of it. You can zoom in maybe slightly more, where Perez definitely pushes Verstappen onto the grass. He had one wheel on the grass here, Verstappen. Perez maintained the lead, and then Verstappen went for an ultra sens into turn three. So I think the first corner was fair enough. It was Verstappen getting forced off in turn two that he wasn't happy about. Perez left the door open, but even then, he didn't really leave the door open that much. Verstappen just absolutely sent it and basically did a Rosberg 2016. I think it was 2016, right? When Rosberg and Hamilton clashed on the final lap and Rosberg just refused to turn in. In this case, Verstappen was pretty much out of control. Had a moment where the front just wouldn't want to turn in. He went all the way wide, forced Perez wide as well. Even Norris got caught up badly by this, and it was actually Hülkenberg that was able to get back down the inside and make a load of places as a result. So it was a complete mess of a turn three. And I feel like in the same way that Verstappen retaliated against Hamilton, he kind of retaliated against Perez as well by just ultra sending it down the inside. Perez was forced off the track here, and we then got these radio messages exchanged. He pushed me off, man, what the F? And then Perez is like, what's wrong with Max? Why is he, sent it down the inside of me and sent me off the track? So I feel like both incidents were, I think the first one was Perez's fault. I think the second one was Verstappen's fault, to be honest. It doesn't matter at the end of the day because they got the 1-2. But yeah, nonetheless, right, it's just more spice at Red Bull. We know that Perez is struggling lately. He's going to be starting tomorrow's race from P15 or whatever it was, right, way in the back. And Verstappen is probably going to win, but Perez is definitely trying to, get back at Verstappen when he can. And Max, he doesn't like the situations like this and is also getting his elbows out. So it was an absolute crazy start. And the race itself was fantastic. I mean, we had Kevin Magnussen here. Russell got a nice move on him done. Then Hamilton got a fantastic move. There was just great racing. It was a shame that the racing was largely for no points, right? There were so many good battles this race, but many of them were for 0 points. So in the end, Hülkenberg, it was kind of inevitable, right, that Hülkenberg's tyres were going to get cooked. And this is what the Haas does. The tyres just died, and Perez eventually got through on him. But even then, Perez was losing time hand over fist to Max. I know that at that point, it's just pure tyre preservation because they had to get these inters to the ends on effectively a dry track. Great battle as well between Leclerc, because Leclerc got the 3rd place. He was down in 9th. He had a really tough time, actually. Like, he was battling with Albon and with Norris and all this, and Leclerc was seemingly really struggling in that Ferrari in these conditions, but he will be starting P2 tomorrow for the race, so should be slightly better for him. And there was even some great battles. I mean, Hamilton versus Leclerc as well. So effectively, about lap 17, 18, Russell was like, all right, this is going to be slick weather. And it seemed like definitely when Verstappen was doing like 114s, and usually the slick tyre times are something like 109s, 110s in normal conditions, like it's quite clear at that point that the crossover is pretty much there, and it was. But of course, is there enough time to make up for the pit stop loss? That was the debate the teams were having. Russell pitted at actually the perfect lap. It looked like he'd come in 1 lap too early, but by the time Hamilton actually got the overcut by staying out 1 more lap on the inters, his softs had just had no temperature, right? And Russell was able to clear Hamilton pretty easily with the warmed up tyres. And then the guys on the softs, or potentially the mediums as well, just the slick tyres in general were gaining like 5 seconds a lap to the guys on Inters, but there was only like, 4 or 5 laps left, so it was like, can you catch up enough cars in time to overtake them? So just fantastic stuff. I mean, this might have been the most fun race we've seen this year, if you ignore the fact that it was a Red Bull 1-2, right? And if there's no battle for the win, it never quite feels the same. Verstappen just dominated. Like, this guy in the wet conditions is just absolutely a masterclass. Another masterclass of Max. He's there every single weekend. But the fun times are back here. Like, we had battles between Hamilton was coming through against Albon, and, Bottas was there as well, but still on the Inters. And then at the end, Hülkenberg, with a brand new set of mediums, made a great couple of overtakes, and Russell was kind of charging through the pack as well. Hülkenberg got back up to P6 in the end. Great for them. And we also had Ocon versus Russell on the final corner, and Ocon actually held on here by 9 thousandths of a second. If the finish line was 1 meter, if the finish line was at the guy waving the checkered flag, 1 meter later pretty much, Russell would have got P7 here, but he didn't. So just great battles all across the place. But really the most interesting thing to me was this whole Max versus Perez thing, because they clearly weren't happy over the radio. Verstappen and Perez both made it a pretty big deal on the comms, and then they had a discussion about it after the race. We see them having a bit of a back and forth there, discussing like, oh, you pushed me off at turn 2, oh, you pushed me off at turn 3 and all this. And, they settled it out a little bit, and Verstappen was like, oh, nothing to worry about. But even Perez used the word angry. He said, I think Max was angry that I went into turn 2, but I didn't see him there. I had a bad turn 1. But I'm like, if you knew you had a bad turn 1, Max was going to be somewhere, wasn't he? And I think it feels like Perez knew he was on his inside because he tried to squeeze him. But I don't know, difficult to say. And then Max says, look, I don't really care about that. We talked about it. It's all good now. And at the end of the day, he dominated the race and or the sprint, right? It's not meant to be a race, what they call it, whatever, as Ted Gravitz likes to say. So it might not matter too much. But yet again, right, between these two driver pairings, Verstappen and Perez, like, Perez is trying to show, some degree of, like, I'm here to Max type thing. And Verstappen doesn't like it. And you can't blame him for not liking it. But nonetheless, it's definitely making things spicy. Unfortunately, tomorrow we won't get more of the same because Perez is going to start from P15, so it's going to be pretty irrelevant. These were the final placings, though. So Verstappen, Perez, Sainz, Stroll, Alonso. Hulkenberg got back to P6 with the fastest lap. Ocon, Russell, no point for the fastest lap here, though. So just those top 8 drivers will get points from 1 down to, well, up to 8 for Verstappen. Norris P9, Hamilton P10, and probably Hamilton gets Norris, and, who knows how far it could go from there if there's another few laps. But the Inters just about held on, and maybe was the preferable strategy. But a very exciting race nonetheless. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.